He offered me $40 million, and I said no before he finished the sentence. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when someone with more money than sense realizes his money didn't work. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Not his assistant, not his lawyer, him, and that call changed everything. I run a boutique architecture firm that most people have never heard of, and that's exactly how I built it. 12 years, one city block at a time, one client relationship at a time, no investors, no board, no one to answer to but the people whose buildings actually stood because I refused to cut corners. We designed hospitals that didn't flood in a storm. We designed schools that survived earthquakes other buildings didn't. We were small, quiet, and we were never for sale. That's what made Weston Kale so sure he could buy us anyway. Weston Kale is the kind of billionaire who thinks a signature is the same as a relationship. He inherited half his fortune and multiplied the rest by buying companies he didn't understand and firing the people who did. He'd flown in that morning on a jet with his name stitched into the headrests, wearing a watch that cost more than my first office building, and he sat across from me in our conference room like he was doing me a favor just by showing up. He didn't ask what we did. He asked what it would take to own it. $40 million, he said, sliding a folder across the table like it was a foregone conclusion. Full acquisition. My firm folded into his real estate empire. My name kept on the letterhead for exactly 18 months, then quietly retired like a mascot nobody needed anymore. He smiled when he said it, the kind of smile men wear when they've never once heard the word no and don't plan on starting today. I opened the folder. I read every line slowly, while he waited with his fingers tapping the table like a man used to silence meaning agreement. Then I closed it and slid it back. No, I said, just that. One word, flat and final. He laughed, the short, surprised laugh of a man who thought he'd misheard. Nobody says no to this number, he said. I told him that wasn't a number, it was a leash, and I don't wear those. His smile disappeared the way weather changes, fast and without warning. He said I was making an emotional decision. I told him I was making a decision he clearly wasn't equipped to understand, because everything in his empire had a price tag, and everything in mine had a signature that actually meant something. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor, said I'd regret it, and walked out without shaking my hand. If you're already feeling the tension in this one, stay with me, because what happened in the next 10 minutes is the part nobody saw coming, not even me. My team thought I was insane. My own operations director, a woman who'd been with me for 9 years, pulled me aside before his car had even left the parking lot and asked if I understood what I'd just turned down. $40 million doesn't knock twice, she said. I told her it wasn't a knock, it was a hand reaching into my pocket, and I'd rather keep both hands free. She didn't argue after that. She just went quiet, the way people go quiet when they're doing math in their head and the math doesn't add up in your favor. Here's what nobody in that room understood except me. I didn't build this firm to sell it. I built it because I watched my father lose his construction company to a buyout exactly like this one, a smiling man with a big number and a small understanding of what he was actually purchasing. I watched that man gut the company in 14 months, lay off men who'd worked there 20 years, and walk away with a tax write-off while my father sat in his kitchen wondering what 30 years of work had actually been worth. I made a promise in that kitchen that I never told anyone about. I promised I would build something no number could take from me, and I meant it. So when Weston Kale walked out of my building convinced he'd just been insulted, I sat back down at that conference table and finished my coffee like nothing had happened. My assistant asked if I was worried. I told her I wasn't worried about a man who thinks ownership and control are the same thing, because they're not, and he was about to learn that the expensive way. What I didn't know yet was that Weston Kale doesn't lose. Not publicly. Not ever. And men like that don't walk away quietly when they hear the word no. They regroup. They find angles. They find leverage in places you didn't even know you'd left exposed. 10 minutes after he left, exactly 10 minutes, my phone rang. Unknown number, area code from out of state. The kind of call you almost don't answer. I answered it anyway. And the voice on the other end wasn't Weston Kale's assistant checking to see if I'd changed my mind. It was my biggest client's lawyer. And the first sentence out of his mouth made my stomach drop. The lawyer's voice was careful in that rehearsed way lawyers use when they're about to say something that will ruin your afternoon. He said there was a situation with the Ferris Tower contract, our biggest active project, 42 stories, $200 million, the job that had taken my firm 3 years to land. He said his client had just received a call from a man named Weston Kale, and that Kale had made an offer to acquire the entire project outright, contractor and all, at a premium so far above market value that it would be financially irresponsible for them not to at least consider it. My stomach didn't just drop. It hit the floor and kept falling. 10 minutes. That's all it took him. He hadn't gone back to his jet to sulk. He'd gone straight to my client and tried to buy the ground out from under me before I'd even finished my coffee. This wasn't a business decision anymore. This was a message. He wanted me to understand that no wasn't a word he accepted. It was a word he simply worked around, and he had the kind of money that made working around things easy for him and devastating for everyone else. I asked the lawyer one question. Had they accepted anything yet? He said no, not yet, but the board wanted a meeting within 48 hours, and given the size of the offer, they'd be foolish not to hear it out. I told him I understood completely, thanked him for the call, and hung up before my voice could shake, because a shaking voice is a losing voice, and I had exactly one thing Weston Kale didn't have: time to think clearly while he was busy being furious. Here's what he didn't know about me. I don't just design buildings. I structure every single contract myself, and I learned that habit the hard way. The same year I watched my father lose everything to a man who thought paperwork was a formality instead of a weapon. Every project my firm takes on includes a clause my lawyers call the continuity provision, and my competitors call overkill. It states that if the primary design and engineering firm is removed from a project for any reason other than breach of contract, the client forfeits the right to use any existing architectural plans, structural drawings, or engineering documentation already filed under my firm's name. In plain language, they could buy the land. They could buy the concrete. They could buy every contractor on that site, but they couldn't touch a single blueprint without my signature, because every drawing, every calculation, every stress test on that building belonged to me, not to them, and definitely not to Weston Kale. Ferris Tower wasn't just a contract. It was 3 years of my life, 400 pages of structural engineering, and a design that had already been approved by the city, the fire marshal, and 2 separate seismic review boards. If Weston Kale thought he could swoop in and buy his way onto a project that already had my fingerprints baked into its foundation, he was about to discover exactly how expensive an education and humility could get. I called my lawyer that same afternoon, a woman named Priya who has never once lost a case against a man who thought his bank account made him bulletproof. I told her everything: the meeting, the $40 million offer, the phone call 10 minutes later. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "He just told you exactly how he plans to fight, and now you get to plan exactly how you're going to win." We spent the next 6 hours going through every page of the Ferris Tower agreement, confirming what I already knew was airtight, making sure there wasn't a single loophole a man with unlimited legal firepower could exploit. There wasn't. I'd made sure of that 3 years ago, back when nobody in that boardroom even knew Weston Kale's name, back when I was just a stubborn woman with a folder of blueprints and a promise I'd made in my father's kitchen. But airtight contracts don't stop billionaires from trying anyway. That's the part people never understand about men like Kale. They don't need to win. They just need to make the fight expensive enough that you consider folding just to make it stop. And Weston Kale was about to prove exactly how far he was willing to go to avoid being the man who got told no. The next morning, Two things happened before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. My firm's business insurance provider called to inform me that a formal complaint had been filed against my company, alleging safety violations on an unrelated project from 2 years earlier, a project that had passed every single inspection with a perfect record. And then, an hour later, a reporter from a financial news outlet emailed asking for comment on a story they were running about instability and internal turmoil at my firm, sourced from, in their words, a person familiar with ongoing negotiations. He wasn't trying to buy me anymore. He was trying to bury me before lunch. And the terrifying part wasn't the accusations themselves, because I knew every single one was false and easily disproven. The terrifying part was how fast he'd moved, how many levers he already had his hands on, and how casually he was willing to pull every single one of them just to punish a woman who'd said one word to him in a conference room. If a man can do this much damage in less than 24 hours over a single rejection, what exactly was he planning to do once he found out I had absolutely no intention of backing down? I didn't call Weston Kale. I didn't call the reporter either. Instead, I called Priya back and told her to do the one thing she does better than anyone else I've ever worked with. Document everything, timestamp everything, and prepare it in a format that would make a judge's decision take exactly 4 minutes to reach. Because a man who moves that fast to destroy someone leaves fingerprints everywhere, and Weston Kale, for all his money, had never once had to be careful. He'd never needed to be. Nobody had ever pushed back hard enough to make carefulness necessary. The fall safety complaint fell apart within 6 hours. My old project had a complete, notarized inspection history, every signature accounted for, every date verified by 3 separate city agencies. The complaint had been filed by a shell entity registered 2 days earlier, with an address that traced back to a law firm on retainer for exactly one client, Weston Kale's holding company. That single detail was enough for Priya to draft a cease and desist so precise it read less like a legal letter and more like a closing argument already halfway to a courtroom. The reporter was easier. I didn't dodge her. I called her myself, laid out the timeline in plain, unshaken sentences, the meeting, the rejected offer, the call to my client 10 minutes later, the fabricated complaint filed under a shell company 2 days before it appeared in her inbox. I told her I had documentation for every claim I was making and none for the ones being made against me, and I asked her a simple question. Did she want to be the reporter who ran a Billionaire's smear campaign as fact? Or the reporter who broke the story of what he actually did when a woman told him no? She went quiet on the phone the same way my operations director had gone quiet in the parking lot, doing math that suddenly wasn't adding up the way she'd expected. 48 hours after that first phone call, I walked into the boardroom where Ferris Tower's leadership was waiting to hear Weston Kale's offer. Except he wasn't the only one who'd requested time on that agenda. I had too. I laid out the continuity provision line by line, the one buried in a contract nobody had bothered to read closely because nobody expected to need it. I explained, calmly, without a single raised word, that Weston Kale could purchase every asset on that job site and still be left holding a $200 million hole in the ground with no legal right to a single drawing that made it a building instead of a pit. I told them exactly what I'd told him in my own conference room 2 days earlier. This wasn't a business decision he was equipped to understand, because he was used to buying things, and what I'd built could never be bought, only earned, and he hadn't earned anything except my full attention. The room didn't need a vote after that. The chairman thanked Weston Kale for his time, told him the board would be moving forward with their existing partner, and the meeting ended in under 9 minutes. Nobody in that room ever heard from him about Ferris Tower again. The financial reporter published her story a week later, but not the one Weston Kale had been hoping to plant. Hers detailed the shell company, the fabricated complaint, the timeline that lined up a little too perfectly with a rejected acquisition offer, and quoted 2 other business owners who came forward once they saw someone finally stand up to him and survive it. describing eerily similar pressure campaigns after their own refusals. His company's stock dipped 9% that morning. His name stopped appearing in acquisition talks for the rest of the year. People in his own industry started asking the one question he'd spent his entire career avoiding. What exactly happens to the people who say no to Weston Kale? I never got another call from him. Not an apology, not a renewed offer, not even the courtesy of silence handled with dignity. Just nothing, the particular nothing of a man who finally understood that some things were never for sale in the first place, and that the 10 minutes he'd spent trying to punish me for saying one simple word ended up costing him far more than $40 million ever could have bought. My firm finished Ferris Tower 11 months later, on time, under budget, exactly the way I build everything. My name is still on that letterhead, still on that blueprint, still on every drawing filed under a company nobody could ever buy their way into owning. And somewhere out there, Weston Kale is still learning the same lesson my father's old business partner never had to face, because I made sure of it decades before he ever sat down across from me. Some doors don't open with money. They only open when you finally learn how to knock.